Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. This phase of the video, this phase of the session, it's actually about to complete this question by making a report. I will support you. I will suggest you with the final version how to make the report. Number one. Number two, then we will compare the report with the actual examiner report. That we need to find out what the mistake the previously the student have done, and you need to conscious about that. So what we have already done, we have calculated the appropriate discount rate. We have done it. Number one, we have calculated the NPV with the all equity finance. We have calculated the adjusted present value. So number one, appropriate discount rate. Recall the things with the appropriate discount rate. We calculated this using the discount rate, assuming the company is 100% equity finance, and the beta asset, the value of the beta asset. And beta asset, two proxies are here. Number one, Liu company. Number two, Sanvinio company. And we have taken the assumption that the beta asset we have identified with these two proxy companies is accurate and reflecting the business risk, or reflecting the business risk that about the motor scooter. And we use that beta asset for determining the discount rate. Number two, then we calculate the NPV assuming the company 100% equity finance, so-called the base case NPV, but here the examiner not mentioned the word base case NPV. Very important. Moreover, the NPV ignoring the financing side effects or assuming 100% equity finance minus 1.06. And finally, appendix 3 incorporating the financing side effects, the APV become 4.78. That's not huge, but marginal. Now the examiner is expecting that, very important, examiner expecting to make a report focusing with these and numerics that we have already done. And the examiner used the word evaluate. Number one, that whether the new project should be undertaken. That's the previous video we have already discussed. Discuss the assumption made in the above estimates assumptions, and discuss whether the APV would be appropriate than conventional NPV. Three things with the 10 marks and 4 marks. 4 marks, total 14 marks here. Total 14 marks. So with the previous video, that we have already finalized these things, a quick briefing. Total marks, first of all, the very important thing is to develop the mindset. That's the key point. You have to think about it, what to do. That's the key point. You have to think about it. So number one, you have to identify during the examination hall what I'm going to do. That is 14 marks, 4 for professional, 10 for core marks. Before starting the question, you have to make a plan. Previously, sometimes students said to me that, sir, this planning time, it's very time consuming. Mark my word, it's time consuming right now. If you practice day by day, over the period of time, you will become used to, you will become in practice to plan the things and apply accordingly. If, for example, there are 200 students in the examination hall, mark my word, 200 students in the examination hall, and out of 200 students, only 20 students who initially plan and then execute, and remaining 90% students, 180 students, started the paper without planning, with hurry. Believe me that then at the end of the 3 hours, you will win the race. You will become the part of under 40%. That is what the examiner expectation. That is what we already read that point with the examining documents. So planning your answer is the key thing. That's an important point. Huh? So once again, time management, you already know that. If you have 14 marks, 25 minutes, you have to spend 5 minutes for planning, 20 minutes for execution. Marks management, two things you have to ask: what to write and how much to write. What to write, how much to write. What to write, number one, carefully read the requirement. Here, what to write includes 4 parts: formatting and 3 more. Formatting means professional marks of the report, number 1. Number 2, evaluate. Number 3, assumptions. Number 4, why APV is preferable. So that's important. That is what to write. How to write, according to the allocated marks. That's the key thing. So now it's time, whenever you are applying whenever you are practicing 50 marks question, you have to follow these advices. Are you people getting the point what I'm saying? Do reply me. Moreover, we have already discussed with the last video that what's the format about. Let's mention the 7 things with the format. That's already discussed. Number 1, mentioning reporting to whom. Then introduction paragraph. Introduction paragraph means what is about the report. This is what about the brief summary, whatever the requirement. Introduction is a part of format. Means you read the requirement carefully. Number 1, read this requirement carefully and just make a 2 to 3 liner briefing what is about the report. Here the report about the evaluation of the investment of motor scooter, evaluation, and considering the assumptions as well, and also the report about why APV is better than the NPV. So initially, whatever just get the extract from the requirement and make an initial paragraph based on the requirement. So these are free marks. That is professional marks. Number 3, then all the context of the reports must be heading. That's headed. And refer the name of the appendix. Okay, conclusion must be diplomatic. Report compiled by date. It's already mentioned that working headed with appendix, that's already mentioned. These 6 things you have to bear in your mind. Number 1. Number 2, now what is inside the report? That is, format is about 4 marks. Inside the report, 10 marks. Here, during practice, you can identify the marks allocation. You can identify the marks allocations. You can identify the marks allocation considering the marking schemes. But during examination hall, examiner just mentioned 10 marks. Then you need to focus. Out of 10 marks, there are 3 things. And you have to make a judgment, own judgment. For 10 marks, I have to split. Number 1, evaluation for 2 to 3 marks. Assumptions, 4 marks. Appropriateness of APV, 4 marks. For example, you have to allot it, or you have to allocate the marks with your own judgment and start it. That's a key point. Okay. Now, this is what the base, whatever you need to implement. Before starting, you must be careful what I should do accordingly. Furthermore, if you are going to start your answer, once again, start with structure report to the report, headed with the report, then report to the board of directors, or you can directly start report to the board of directors and so on. First, introduction. I'm here mentioning the key points of the reports. These key points you don't need to write with the examination, but these key points that must be in your mind whenever you are start writing. This blue mentioning italic, that's your writing, I'm expecting. But what I personally suggest that whatever you are going to write, the points must be in your mind. That introduction, what I will mention, what is about the project. The project is about the evaluation of motor scooter project, environmental friendly motor scooter project, and evaluation method APV. But we have taken some assumptions here and also considering the appropriateness of the APV. What I personally suggest that whatever you are executing, something in your mind that I will write accordingly. So these are the key points I mentioned here, and you have to write it accordingly. Either these points are you either in your brain with this point at that particular, either in your brain, or sometimes some students make a rough work initially, but I don't suggest that make a rough work first, because in examination you have a very limited time to implement. But think about that. What should I write? Then start working. Same case, then introduction, then about evaluation. If examiner use some terminologies, evaluations, assumptions, all these things, you have to make a clear heading. You ask evaluation, I'm writing the evaluation. With the evaluation, what should be the points in your mind? Mark my word, whenever examiner use the term evaluate with any part of the question, evaluate here, any part of the question, I must say, focus on the verb the examiner mentioned here. Evaluate term, the verb evaluate means balance your answer. Balance your answer using numerics. For example, if we are going to evaluate this answer or any answer with 3 appendix 1, 2, 3, first of all, I will start the facts. The facts about that, the NPV, considering 100% equity finance, the project is negative. But incorporating reference appendix 1, appendix 2. But incorporating financing side effects, reference appendix 2. The projects have become positive APV. So apparently the project should be accepted. Project should be accepted. That's the key point. But you have to mention here, because evaluation having 2 marks. 2 marks means the completeness of at least 2 points, 2 to 3 marks, 2 to 3 marks. If you just say evaluate the positive, the answer is not complete. Yes, you have to drill down more things. Here I use the word drilling the facts. Drilling facts means the base case NPV or NPV with 100% equity finance, that is negative. And incorporating financing side effects, that is only marginally, only marginally for something, the value of 4 point something positive. And in our analysis, majority of the cash flows belongs to 4th year. That's we discussed with the last session. Majority of the cash flows belongs to 4th year. So this is a very critical matter. So we have to focus on incorporating more things with respect to the risk and uncertainty. Just a quick line, because you have only 2 marks. Don't put extra effort by adding more things about risk and uncertainty here, because evaluation having only 2 to 3 marks. So maximum 2 complete points more than enough. That is evaluation. Then your judgment says that assumptions 4 points, 4 marks. So at least I have to write 3 complete points. 3 complete points. So number one, the discussion about asset beta. What assumption we have taken here? Number one, you must have to mention that we have taken the proxy companies or rival companies' asset betas by adjusting the financial risk, and use that asset beta to estimate all equity finance discounted. So we have taken assumption now. Whenever we work with the proxy company, actually we are taking the assumptions, 2 assumptions: the asset beta reflecting the business risk, and that asset beta we are using as a discounted. So this is a complete point of one assumption. Whatever the variables we have used, that's we assuming certain and not change. And you have to mention the appendix for first point, this is about appendix 1. For second point, this is appendix 2. Number 3 and number 4, that is appendix 3. That financing side effects, we use cost of debts as a discounted. Maybe we use risk-free rate. Interest rate, we use that will not change, and the debt capacity still maintained. Out of 4, you can mention 3 points maximum. The very easy asset betas for appendix 1. For appendix 2, variable will not change, remain same. For appendix 3, cost of debts will be the discounted, not the risk free. Basic. But whenever you put the answer, reference must be attached. Appendix 1, the name of the company, sometimes name of the company, sometimes appendix, like this. Then finally, APV or NPV. Means why APV preferable? What I have changed the answer. It's not exactly the model answer. I have incorporated something here that's student caliber. The model answer actually is not the student caliber. What I personally think, for 4 marks, whenever you are comparing something 1 versus 2, or comparing and mentioning which one is preferable, I personally think you must have to start to explain the things. You have to start with explaining the both concept. What I mean to say, actually, the issue is that the report means we are presenting to someone, and the audience don't have any idea about this. First of all, what I should do, I will explain to the audience what is the meaning of APV, means how to calculate the investment evaluation by APV, how to investment evaluation by NPV. That's clear. 2 paragraphs, 2 things. For example, very simple, APV. With APV, we split, divide and conquer, split the cash flow in 2 components: operating cash flows with discounted and KE ungeared, and the financing side effects, discounted KD or RF. Separate cash flows, discounting the cash flows with the relevant risk, divide and conquer. With explanation, don't use the word which one is better. By NPV, you just take all the cash flows and using the average discounted, that is back. Then by the second point, why prefer APV? APV prefer because separate out areas. You have to split. Separate out means you have to split the cash flows, and then discount means easily identify which part of the cash flows creates how much value. For example, in this case, operating cash flows not creating the value, having negative, but financing side effects creating the value in a huge manner, which reflects the negative base case NPV convert into the positive APV. That is the point. And then make one praise why APV having more preferable, but also consider that APV having some limitation. For example, ignoring financial distress, tax exhaustion, so on. So these are the things, but still APV will be preferable. If examiner use the word which one is preferable or why APV preferable, your last wording, last, must be with this conclusion. That's why the above reasons APV is preferable. Candidates, 1 minute silent because the voice of prayers is coming here. A single minute silent here. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah. So finally, the last point, that is conclusion. Do remember that conclusion is actually the part of professional marks. I have mentioned here what should be the parts of conclusion. What should be the parts of conclusion? Number one, this highlight this point, professional marks. Number two, make recommendation. Make recommendation. Like after considering all the assumptions and the calculation reference to the appendix, the project should be acceptable because of the positive NPV. But the final line, this final line that must use the terminology that must be diplomatic. The final wording must be diplomacy, with diplomacy. You have to mention that although you above mentioned that project should be acceptable, but as a presenter, because it's all, the report is based on the information you have collected and number of assumptions, and it's all about future. So you have to play the game in a safe zone. However, the risk and uncertainty like sensitivity and the scenario analysis must be undertaken because of number of assumptions uh, are taken for the above analysis, and the decision is it's marginal, and the majority of the cash flow is based on the therefore. So this diplomacy you have to use. Are you getting the point? Don't use the word diplomacy. Huh? It's just for the understanding for you people. Are you getting the point? How you will write the workout accordingly? Hello, can you please reply me? I hope I know that this is what majority part we have discussed with the last session, but this is very much important. That part of the session creates a hammering effect to you people. That's how you will write the theoretical aspect, because I know that you people facing the challenge about how to write an answer. Now, I personally suggest whatever we have done with the report aspect, now come on. We need to work out to read some part of the requirement. That is what examining expectations are. Requirement B1. Requirement B about prepare a report covering number of issues. Okay. What are the important things here? One by one. Part B1 required candidate to estimate appropriate discount rate to be used and determine NPV of the project based on equity finance. The wording of the requirement strongly hinted that appropriate discount rate in circumstances of the project's ungeared cost of equity. Exhibit 2 provided financial data of two companies, Liu and Senvenu company, okay, which enabled candidates to estimate asset beta to the businesses, okay, and all these things. Using that estimate, candidates were then expected to apply CAPM to determine project ungeared cost of equity. This is what examiner expectation. Okay. The calculation were mixed. Significant number of candidates scored limited marks, while many scored full marks. Okay. Why the students got low marks was majority of candidates were able to calculate asset beta of Liu company and incorporate systematic risk of the two distinct business activities. Only one of these activities was relevant for new project, so candidates expected to use data from Senvenu company to isolate systematic risk of the new project. However, there was strong evidence that many candidates unable to use the algebraic technique. Okay, this one is important. Means you have sometimes you require some algebraic working. So where in the syllabus part, where sometimes use algebraic working for the complications of the WAC, like we discussed with this question, the complications with respect to proposition 2. So you have a good practice about the proposition 2. Sometimes related to the bond valuations aspect. Bond valuations matter. Sir, with algebraic, is that compulsory to show all steps with the spreadsheet? Not necessarily. I strongly suggest you just mention one step working like this. if you wanted to use some algebraic matter here, like this. So, for example, with the previous session, with the previous video, we required the beta acid of motor scooter. And we have mentioned this now. So you can work out directly with the calculator and find out the value of 0.9 without mentioning these two steps. Yes, you can do this. You can ignore these two steps if you are master of the algebraic. If not, then make a steps, show the steps. But I strongly suggest don't ignore the 100% steps. At least one step you have to mention. Why? Because if your direct working by casting error through the calculator become wrong, examiner will not give you any single mark. For example, if you ignore, just directly mention 0.9 with your own working and some casting error here, examiner will not give you any mark. So limited working you have to mention here. That's an important point. Okay. Number 2, a significant number of candidates also confuse the financial data from one company with data from other. This is called lack of practice. Although markers instructive to be relatively generous, as long as the overall method was correct, more carefully scrutiny and planning would have to avoid such mistakes. What is that word? More careful scrutiny and what this word? What is this word? What is this word? Planning. Planning. That's a key point. Quality preparation is the key point. Quality preparation. Other common errors include incorrectly calculating a geared cost of equity rather than ungeared cost of equity, which other attempted weighted average cost of capital. No, this is not the requirement. So before entering the question, you have to plan first. Candidates making these errors need to understand the rationale behind the discounted that is used in the base case NPV calculation. Here, examiner not use the word base case NPV, but use the word NPV, assuming company 100% equity finance. On the whole, candidates who did not do well demonstrated either a lack of understanding of rationale behind the discounted used in base case NPV calculation, or lack of calculation practice in terms of calculating appropriate asset. For example, how to isolate one business activity of the assets beta with the diversified company. Okay, now come on, next part. I will share you this document as well. Don't worry about the basic NPV errors. You have to identify what is that point. But my more focus is about yes, some theoretical point. Some theoretical point. Yes. Yes, this paragraph is very much important, especially last 4 lines. Requirement B4, that is making the report. At first step, part 4 required candidates to evaluate whether the project should be undertaken and discuss the assumptions in the estimates. Overall, this part of requirement was often answered well, although there are still many candidates who provide One word recommendation. Provide one word recommendation as part of your evaluation. One word, one line just. At this level, candidates are expected to provide more meaningful analysis rather than accept or reject. Means, for example, examiner is expecting from us, if we are evaluate. So, only the accept or reject the facts, it's not the complete answer. But more drill down. For example, you have to mention the marginal acceptance of the decisions. For example, major cash flows based on fourth year. That is what examiner expecting here. One word recommendation is not acceptable. At this level, candidate expected to provide more meaningful analysis than accept or reject. And at more basic level would be expected to provide justified recommendation to earn any credit. The answer discussing the assumptions were done well. Although there are still many candidates who provide generic rather than scenario specific assumptions. If you put the things like rote learning, the answer is not acceptable. Only candidates provide generic, means whatever you mug up the things from your regular study, just throw it. Just throw the knowledge to the paper. It's not possible to get 100% marks. The marks, listen carefully, the marks available for such generic rote learning always going to strictly limited at this level. Best answer often demonstrate high degree of professional skepticism. For example, explain why assumption not appropriate and how this will impact shareholder wide changes to the APV. For example, here, if you are mentioning that we are taking the interest rate, assumption, we are putting assumption that interest rate we are here for subsidized rate, but if the interest rate become change, all of the cash flows become change. All of the analysis become change. You have to add this line. Assumptions, all the cash flows are certain, but majority of the cash flow, majority of the our decision is majority based on fourth year cash flows. So we need to critically analyze. Candidates, you are a part of a strategic level. You are not the part of skill module at higher level of hierarchy, where if and buts are very much important. Last point. Candidates were also, next one expected to discuss whether APV more appropriate than NPV in B4. The answer to this part of requirement were mixed, with many candidates erroneously stating NPV does not take into account debt finance. Wrong. Examiner mentioned NPV takes into account debt finance. That's KD in the back. Many candidates provide lengthy explanation, about mechanism of the APV calculation, how this is calculated, but this is not the requirement. Even though this was not the part of requirement and therefore attracted no credit. Means it's not about what you have written. It's about, is this relevant? The point is that, is this relevant? A very important saying that focus on being productive instead of busy. Mark my words. You have to write somewhere. You have to focus on being productive rather than or instead of busy. Instead of writing a lot, it's better to write productive. Someone says that, a very competent person says that. In our real world, in your real life, apply this rule. A lot of persons in your surrounding, you can observe that a lot of guys, or a lot of male, females, or the in your elders, they do a lot of work with the same 24 hours. A lot of work. And sometimes you ask them, sir, how it's possible to do a lot of working with the same schedule, only 24 hours. Then they are so much productive rather than just looking too busy. So here, same things. Write the answer according to the requirement. So be productive, not mentioning the lengthy answers. The best answer, discuss the rationale behind both appraisal method and then the best answer, discuss the rationale behind both methods. Means what is NPV, what is APV, and then explain why APV more appropriate for Zincini project. Same answer like this. Ideally, explanation. What is the meaning of APV, NPV, and why APV prefer? And particularly mention the name of the company. That's important. And finally, we have already discussed with the last video about how to earn the professional marks. That is the point. That is what connect with the last video accordingly. Candidates, moreover, the questions also have the questions the requirement of A and requirement of C. The requirement of A and requirement of C. With that particular suggested answer, I have particularly mentioned with the, for example, that is part A. Part A. That is part A. Actually, here are three important things that the company using the strategy, financing strategy, and examiner asking you to comment on that. Comment on that. That is one thing is about post-completion audit. Number two, the fixed discount rate. Number three, the equity finance. I strongly suggest that the first very important thing, you have to plan first. First, whatever you need to write, do that activity, you have to plan first. Highlight the point. Plan first for two things. How much to write, what to write, and how much to write. 2 to 3 marks for each policy. 2 to 3 marks for each policy. For each policy. So, for example, post-completion audits. So what does that mean? We actually compare the actual things with the budget. Budget here means whatever the NPV or APV working we have done. And there should be a mechanism for the audit. And you have to, first of all, think that point and then implement. I have mentioned the key points here, including the fixed discount rate and then using the equity finance here. That's the point. So that is what you have to do accordingly. Same case for the part C as well, and conclude your answer. Work out. Part C is about arranging of the finance through debts or asset securitization. For asset securitization, that's a point. So you have to refer your book reading or the studies about the securitization, then compare the securitization with the debts. That is the point. So that is all about this part of area, and this is what connected with the previous video, and I hope that that will also beneficial to you. So about this, thank you very much about this part of the session. Take care a lot. And for this part of the session, that is over. Thank you very much.